I'm James Turk. I'm a director of the Gold Money Foundation, and it's my pleasure to be here today with Markus Kerber, an attorney as well as a professor of finance and political economy at the Technische Institut Universität in Berlin. Markus, thank you for being with me here this morning.
Pleasure.
There are a number of things I want to talk to you about, but I'd first like to start with the developments of the euro in Germany and the court case that you brought to the German Constitutional Court. Can you provide us with a little bit of background information as to what you've been doing there?
Yes, when the bailouts have been voted in May and June 2010, I initiated a group of plaintiffs who were not willing to accept that the European Treaty is going to be violated because we have in the European Treaty, so to speak, a normative pillar, which is the no bailout clause, which means that the European Monetary Union is the experiment of creating a monetary union, single currency between sovereign states, which presupposes that these sovereign states remain liable for their own debt. So the case of financial assistance to Greece was no longer covered by the treaty. The treaty gives only authorizations for emergency measures in case of natural catastrophes, whereas the Greek case was a case of self-made, poor fiscal governments. Soon after that, we got the so-called euro crisis with Mr. Trichet interpreting the markets as being dysfunctional and giving guidelines to the governments to create what he called a rescue or stabilization mechanism, which was decided overnight, 9th and 10th of May, without the heads of government being really aware of what happened. As a matter of fact, these bailout measures have not stabilized the market. They have not soothed the market because the fundamental problems of the Eurozone have not been solved. And the fundamental problems of the Eurozone are, of course, the fiscal imbalances, the budgetary imbalances of Ireland, Portugal and Greece, but the underlying problems are the lack of competitiveness of these countries. Mm-hmm. So this was an ill-conceived concept to create a monetary union with so divergent economies. And as a matter of fact, apart from the initial years where the sweet poison of the euro created some bubble economies in Greece, Portugal, and Ireland due to local factors, but sooner or later they recognized that they are not competitive enough to compete with the northern states. So we have, as a fundamental problem, a split in competitiveness between the northern states, generating a trade surplus. That is the case not only for Germany, but for Austria, for Finland, for the Netherlands. And the southern states, including France, with large trade deficits and balance of payment problem. So the fiscal measures, the measures of fiscal emergency in form of bailout funds, have not cured the problems of catching up with competitiveness. As all these countries, these problematic countries, cannot devaluate to buy time in order to reorganize their economies, there has to be a very harsh program of recession, which brings growth down. So, as a matter of fact, not only the problem which Greece tries to achieve within 2-3 years is a problem which can be achieved within a generation. Now trying to achieve it within 2 or 3 years brings the economy so much down that, as a matter of fact, as a result, tax revenue goes down. The Greek case is a special case because it's a combination of bad fiscal behavior and deficit spending. The Irish case is a case of a country of 4 million people being totally overbanked, where banks have led to operations and have attracted risk which they should have avoided. And Portugal is perhaps the most classical case of the fundamental problems of the Eurozone. It is the country which still didn't have that much of a competitive real economy, but now is imprisoned in the monetary costume of the euro. So they cannot devaluate, and the euro is simply too expensive for them. So I don't think it is possible for Portugal to become very, very competitive in a, say, not too distant future. So the consequence is you have not only enormous trade balance deficits and balance of payment deficits, you have fiscal and budgetary imbalances, which have now to be covered by subsidies. So the first fund was exposing Germany to a risk of 122 billion euros. This one, which is the beefed up fund with larger tools, allowing the fund to buy on the primary market, to be more a preventive fund. Germany is exposed to a risk of 211 billion euros. And at the time of concluding this in the German parliament, the Brussels oligarchy, Mr. Barroso, the head of the Commission, the head of the Eurogroup, Mr. Juncker, and of course our French friends argue for an enlarged fund. So they know it won't be enough. It won't be enough to save or to rescue neither Spain nor Italy, and it will not cure the fundamental problems of the Eurozone. We took the government to court for the financial assistance to Greece and for the first rescue umbrella, which had a limited risk, too much, but limited, smaller compared to the one we have today. And the Constitutional Court said two things. They didn't consider the total fallout risk as a risk for the existence, for the financial existence of Germany. They didn't say where the limit is, but they said, well, overall, this would not make German public finance unsustainable, but there might be a limit of sustainability of accepting risk. So this borderline has still to be found in the court. And secondly, they said, for any bailout, for any specific bailout operation, you need prior consent of the budget committee of the German parliament. So those who triumphantly applauded yesterday's survival victory by Frau Merkel will please take into account that for any further bailout in the future, the German budgetary committee in the parliament has to deliberate on that, has to vote in favor of it. And without that deliberate, positive vote, the representative and the board of governors of the European Financial Stability Facility cannot vote in favor. As Germany, as all the other nations has veto power, so the situation is blocked. We'll see whether this parliamentary procedure is going to be fully respected according to the letter and to the spirit of what the court said. But as a matter of fact, the jurisdiction only concerns the past. The new beefed up fund has not been judged by the court, and of course I feel extremely curious. I'm very curious to know what the court will say about a beefed up fund which increased German risk exposure from 122 billion to 211, because it's obvious that the tendency will be to beef it up again, because the fund would not have the means to rescue Italy or to come to the help of Spain.